Hello, I'm Bobby Jones, the Director of Customer Success for Bloomz, and we bring to you today a webinar series dedicated to discussion about communication in education today. The communication is advancing in education due to the times that we have had with COVID and the requiring for us to utilize various means to engage with families and the community to continue our relationships in order to support student success. Today, Bloomz brings you two experienced educators that are working to navigate the changes in communication strategies for their district and schools. I am proud to introduce Michelle Miller, presenting from Enterprise Elementary School District in California. She comes to us with a wealth of perspective as a K-12 instructional technology coach. And also Amy Stevens, who comes to us with various background knowledge from the classroom to technology integration role. Amy is presenting from South Henry School Corporation in Indiana tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited to share a discussion about communication in education and the changes that we're experiencing as we're navigating this whole change and what it means to us, the strategies that we are developing, the strategies we're looking at, and Amy and Michelle are going to talk about those things tonight. I also want to thank you for joining us tonight and also want to invite you to the next two series for the next Mondays, the two following Mondays, where we're going to talk about more depth of communication in education. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Michelle Miller to go ahead and start our discussion with communication and education, and Amy Stevens is also going to be talking with you. They're going to share their experiences and perspectives currently as they're working with communication every day in their schools.
Hey, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm so excited to be with you guys today. This is such an important topic. I don't know how to share without making a lesson plan. It's just the way I am. So my background, I'm going to share a little bit about my sixth year. So I started prior to COVID. I've never taught in a pandemic. I've only ever been in this role during the pandemic. So I have the view totally from a tech coach perspective and seeing at the district level how it's impacted our families, our teachers, and even our kids. And so that's where I'm coming from today. And I know Amy has a wealth of knowledge. I'm going to let her share more about herself.
I love it. Thank you so much, Michelle and Bobby. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. Hi, I'm Amy Stevens, again from Indiana, and I'm so happy to speak with all of you on just communication and truly how we have grown, because I myself have grown throughout my career. I am heading into, we'll say 16 plus years in the education world here in the state of Indiana. And it's a little bit smaller than you may think when looking at my age, because I actually went back to school to be a teacher. Yes, I was the one that told my college guidance counselor when they suggested elementary education to me. I was like, I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if I can handle a whole classroom full of students. And lo and behold, I found my way to the classroom of students. And I remember about 6-7 years ago, I was the little, technology leader in my classroom, in my grade level, then in my building. And then someone at central offices was like, why don't you come and do this district wide? And I thought, okay. And then a job in Project Lead the Way, which is a program, a curriculum that is geared towards encouraging students to grow up, to be problem solvers, to be engineers, to be scientists. And that opened up in my home. I had to submit. And they, my mindset that had been one-to-one for the longest, yet e-learning just 2 months later, we were turned into virtual teachers. And as the past couple years have transpired, and I say years because we're almost at that 2-year mark, I'm so happy to be able to make connections through a platform such as this, using fantastic communication companies such as Bloomz. And Michelle, this is such a joy to be able to team up with you tonight and to share just the view from the K-12 roof.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And it's a topic, it's a conversation that really needs to take place because so many different things are changing. I mean, we know that prior to COVID, education, when you would communicate with families, was so different. You were in person for everything. There was no masks. You would greet kids at the door, be those fun handshakes. I mean, I remember when I was in a classroom, I would have families oftentimes come in the mornings and kind of hang out before the bell rang, where we'd get to talk and connect and check in about their kid. You would check in with them at the end of the day if they were parent pickup. So there's way more face-to-face communication. So it was appropriate for me to send home a newsletter in a backpack every Monday, like, hey, this is what's going on this week, just so you're aware. And I remember when I left the classroom, it was a few years prior to COVID, and all like the cutting edge technology teachers were beginning to have their own website and do maybe virtual newsletter, but it wasn't the norm. It was the minority, I would say. Now, prior or post COVID, now we've got everything is virtual, and those teachers who might have been more tech resistant were kind of thrown into the sea of technology. And so now, if we are in person, everything's masked, so it does make that like face-to-face communication a little bit harder. And the most likely scenario, I know we finished parent-teacher conferences recently, and the majority of those were all virtual. So we really are taking that piece to be way more on the screen than we have been in the past. So it kind of seems like when we do communicate with families, making that as impactful and effective as possible, which is a really tough place to be in right now. But we do know that almost every family has a smartphone, has a tablet. I mean, we are in a place right now where there are more resources than there ever have been. But what does that practically look like? So I'm really glad that we're having that conversation today.
Absolutely. Michelle, do you remember possibly conversations, I would probably say within like 5 years, of teachers being invited to technology, professional development times, and they were like, I'll come because I'm going to be nice, but I really don't necessarily buy in because I don't want the technology to replace me. I found that I had, just a little bit of the buy-in from teachers, but they would just have this small little splinter of just fear of like, how is this, this power device going to be me? And it was my job to teach them how to use that learning device, right, to transform learning. And I know that that's what you're doing right now. And I had to bring that up because I have so many teachers that are like, I would have never imagined that this is what technology integration looked like.
Right. Well, and I love that you explained the way you kind of got into what you're doing right now was that you would start using something and then other teachers would see it and start, oh, I want to try that. And you would show them. And that's how you got into this job. That's how I got into this job too. And that's what I found was the most successful way to kind of share a new program was I would find that one teacher who I know would go all in on something. And I would say, okay, I'm going to show you how to use this. And then other teachers would watch that teacher using that platform and go, oh, I want to try that. That looks awesome. That is the best way to implement new technology. And that's what I found, especially when we were in COVID and trying all this different technology to make connections with our families, was that teachers went to those other teachers who had been using those things for support, for resources, and to try to figure out what worked because they'd already tried it. So I just love that you shared that. It's so important. And isn't that how we get teachers to try new things is when we know it's been successful, because time is so precious. They don't want to spend all their time on something not knowing if it will be successful or not. So I just love that. I think that's awesome. So I love this quote here because I love it. And I think so many of our best practices when it comes to communication really were created prior to COVID. And now we're in a totally different world. So we have a couple of different topics when it comes to communication and kind of remembering the overall goal. So we know that when we communicate with families, the ultimate goal is to make a connection. Now, when I am face to face with someone, that's a pretty simple and easy thing to do. But when you add that element of technology, it can be a little more complicated. Like I mentioned with our, the newsletter that I would send home once a week, and in the backpack, the paper newsletter, that's a one-way form of communication. It's not that back and forth with families, which we know they prefer. So whenever we're using any sort of platform to communicate with our families, I think that big question is, are we making connections with them this way? I mean, there's so many different features and resources and tools that teachers can use now, but do we know our families? Are we using what supports them best? I know, Amy, you had talked about or mentioned that your district sent out a survey to your families to figure out what worked best for them. Can you share more about that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, because, sometimes I have found that we're afraid to put out opportunities for feedback with families because we're afraid of what we'll hear, like what happens if they don't like my strategy, because then what am I going to do? And it just became a no-brainer. We were virtual March 2020 to May 2020, and right at the end of May we put out a survey. What went well, what did not go well? We completely understand that everybody's world has been turned upside down. And then we took that information and we gathered, just some tools, right? So we got a little bit of training under our belts. We had a little bit of consistency with how we were hosting our virtual classroom experience. For example, one platform was a little bit more user-friendly for our kindergarten and our first graders. Why? Because parents were going to be, or a grown-up was typically right there with that child. For grades 2 through 5, it was a different experience. Those children were getting themselves signed in and signed out of meetings. So I share that because sometimes it isn't a Band-Aid or a blanket approach for our families. Well, we started last year. And of course, there was an opportunity for your child to be virtual, and it was done differently in pretty much every school in my county. However, our district stayed the same. And throughout the year, we gathered feedback at the end of the first semester and then again in May. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that we found was parents wanted to know what was going on. By that time, they'd gotten in what seemed like a groove, and yet they were feeling like all of these little, if you could imagine juggling balls in the air, were like little apps. They were juggling them up in the air. 3 apps were for one child and 1 app was for another child. And then there was the sports apps if their child was involved in sports. And then there was, the piano lessons that were virtual, and everybody just kind of seemed to be using different platforms. And so we took that feedback and we were able to streamline our approach of how to reach families. And yes, we do love our Bloomz product, but ultimately what we found out was that email wasn't working, phone calls weren't being, or voicemails weren't being listened to, but a push notification was getting our families the quick information that they needed.
Oh, wow, that's so fascinating. That's really interesting. We as a district kind of struggled with the very beginning to figure out like what exactly will our parents respond to the best. And you're absolutely right. There was this overwhelming sense of overwhelmed, for lack of a better term, because parents were using Zoom for one thing and Google Meet for another thing. And there were all of these different platforms that they were using for different things. and emails were coming left and right, and it was really difficult to convey the overall message that we needed. And so our district responded with creating videos. We did videos, I think, for everything, and had a YouTube channel, which our district had never had before. And so we kind of brought everything to videos and cheat sheets and trying to offer as much parent support as possible, because it's so right. Different communities need different things. And I love that you mentioned about how you saw within your district that different grade levels even needed different platforms. We found that too. And so we used a completely different platform for our K2 classes than we did our 312, which I don't think we ever would have expected prior to going into distance learning. And that was really interesting. I also think that that's something to think about when we're talking about partnering with our parents and our families to communicate. I think especially for grades, I would say 6-12, depending on what kind of community you have, bringing in the child in that communication piece. So I work with an 8th grade math teacher who's just phenomenal. And anytime he sends out any communication to a parent, he always CCs the student and it goes to their student email, so that they're a part of that communication piece. And I think that's really important to bring them in when it's developmentally appropriate. But ultimately that boils down to knowing our families and our communities and what they need to best support those kids.
Yes, absolutely. You know, my daughter is in 6th grade and she is frequently CC'd on emails from her principal on news, on attendance celebrations. She is one that likes to have, things checked off, and she had a missing assignment. And guess what? All of us were CC'd on the email, and it was truly a great conversation because we were able to check in on it and we were able to fix it, right? When you know better, you do better. And so, it's been fun. Those email addresses on that list is ringing a little bell with me because my husband is one of them and he is still working from home. And so when he receives emails or when he receives communication from the elementary via push notification, or he gets onto the virtual classroom experience that his son's 3rd grade teacher has created, it's very important that we use his time and all of our family's time wisely, right? Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with my dearest friends who are so incredibly talented in their field. And then they've called me and they're like, I don't think I can do kindergarten math. They sent home this giant explanation and I'm freaking out because they're no longer carrying the one, and I'm laughing hysterically. I did have to throw that in because I am one of those that was like, everybody breathe, we've got this. And I said, one of the best things that we can do to my staff was be clear, be concise, be complete. But before you even send anything, think about it. Is this necessary? Are you sending information just to send it? Or are you truly creating this classroom experience online where the parents do feel a part of it or the guardians do feel a part of it? And I just found that just really strong feedback, not only from the families, but I see that in my own house as well. If we're going to be teaching and if we're going to be communicating and if we're going to be working from home, then we need to be able to make sure that when we do get our family's attention, that we are really clear and that we are concise, that we have a complete thought, and that we just kind of think about, is it necessary before we send it?
I think that's so valuable, and it's easy to forget because I think there was a time when there may have been under communication, and then we went into COVID and virtual learning, and then we went to over communication, and now we're trying to figure out what that new balance and that new norm might be. But I think it's just really important to not go backwards, because we always said, or I remember at least I used to always say to my parents, hey, I want to partner with you. You really are a partner in this educational experience with your child. It takes the 3 of us to make this work. But now that really is, it's always been true, but it's never as true as it is now, because we were in distance learning where we could not have done it without the parents. The parents were a huge piece of educating their kids. And so with that, I think there's this need for a more concise, clear communication like what you talk about, because we can't go back to the way things were. Parents really are a valuable partner, and so we need to find what works best for them, and work not to overwhelm them, because as I'm sure you can speak to, everyone is feeling a lot of overwhelming feelings, and we only want to make things better, not in any way worse. I'm sure
Yes.
you would agree with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially with those families that were like, I didn't sign up for this. Like every day, I just made sure my child was going to a great school and that
Yes.
things were great. Like I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, we are going to link arms and we're going to figure it out together. But the best thing is communication and
I
making
agree.
sure that we are really truly talking to each other.
Yeah, parents are the superheroes, and in this entire scenario, they're the absolute superheroes, because I'm a credentialed teacher, but I don't think I want to stay home and teach my own children unless I had to. They deserve all the awards. So, and now that we're kind of here and we have all of this different technology that we can use, like what do we use that supports those positive and impactful partnerships, like what I talked about with the teachers, parents, and students? And knowing that the more technology we bring in, the more support they need. Like I know when we started with distance learning, our parents were just struggling. I mean, my entire job as an instructional technology coach is to train the teachers in my district to use the technology that we're incorporating to help their lessons. Like that's my job. And then COVID hit, and we had parents who they didn't know how to open up a Google Classroom. They'd never done that before. Why would they have had to have done that? And now they have to go in and make copies of attachments and email those things out and turn in assignments in Google Classroom and access all sorts of different programs through their web browser and signing. It was just a big mess. And so one of the things that we did was we would offer support hours to families, and we would we created a new email line just for those tech questions for parents that they could email at any time. We did tutorials, cheat sheets, videos, because they were asked to do things that they had never had any training in. And so I think it's really important that whatever platform districts are using, that they realize that they're having to train teachers on how to use something and it involves parent communication in any way, they're going to need to train those families. So I think it's really important just to remember that that support system be there in some way, because we can't just throw something new at families and expect them to know what they need to do. I think that's a really important point. And then I included this. Okay, so I love, Amy, what you said about emailing wasn't working, but you found in your district that the push notifications were, because the national, and I have to write this down, the National School Public Relations Association did a study this last year, and they surveyed over 43,000 participants in 20 different states. And they found that the top 5 preferences for parent communication with teachers, the number one was email. That was the
Okay.
number one, right? Which was fascinating because that wasn't what our district wanted either. But I think about that, and it's one of the few tech ways, at least in the beginning, for that two-way conversation, for things to go back and forth. The rest were like an online parent portal, sort of like a Bloomz, and then e-newsletters, school websites, and then telephone. But I just thought that was really interesting, and I think it raises that bigger key of there has to be that two-way communication. It can't just be a newsletter in the backpack anymore.
Yes, absolutely. And two, I think, that's almost like a security blanket email is, right? And
Yeah.
I know with me, if we did like an icebreaker and it was just like, hey, how many current emails are in your inbox? It was very telling, right? Those that have
Yes.
0 and those that have over 1,000. But yet there's a trail. And so I think a lot of times our families really wanted to make sure that whatever communication was given or whatever communication was sent, that there was a trail so they could at least reflect, remind, and just respond when needed. And that is, maybe sometimes what we do in time of panic and time of pivot, where we just are changing the way that we do things. And it's like, wait, this is not routine. I got to make sure that I remember everything they said.
I think that's really important. Well, and so I think what that makes me wonder about is overall tone, because emails are not, I mean, the emails are very biased. I can read an email in a certain mood and read one thing into it, and then the next day look at that same email and see something completely different that may not have been there. And so I'm always wondering how to make those connections as an educator when you're just emailing back and forth. When in doubt, I'm going to jump on a virtual meeting so I can see someone's face, I can hear their tone, I can figure out, okay, where are we at? What do you need? But then I'm also coming from a primary background where at the most I had 30 kids. I didn't teach junior high or high school where I had, upwards of 200 students. So it's like, how do you keep that connection when you have larger groups? I think that's a really interesting point to think about, because it's difficult to do, but at least when you have that email, you know that you're starting that thread, and that's a good place to start. And I think that's where, if you set up as a teacher at the very beginning of the year your communication practices, what parents know they can expect, it makes emailing throughout the year a lot easier.
Absolutely. For a teacher to, truly reach out to parents in a similar fashion that they reach out to their students, there's not a one, stop shop or again, a blanket approach to doing it. And so just like we would think of our students as individual beings, and maybe some are really great with visual, maybe some are really great with audio, and some are really great with, just maybe even if your class is doing a song or something, I'm not sure, but connecting with parents and all those different intelligences is what I'm getting at. I see
Mhm.
a lot of that through that list. And I think that that is truthful. I think that our families are really wanting to be a part of the online classroom, because right now, for many schools, being in person in the schools as a grown up is probably few and far between.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and two, trying to find what platform parents are going to be the most comfortable with and what they're going to receive is very trying, because I don't think there've ever been so many options as there are right now. Like, my husband is a school administrator of a small K-5 school in our district, and he goes into over communication mode in the sense that he'll send out the same messages in multiple platforms. So he does a weekly video that he sends out to families, and they do their announcements. Then he has a weekly virtual newsletter that he also sends out that has links to the video and everything else. Then he does the weekly podcast that has all that same information so parents can subscribe if they want to, in addition to the weekly voice message home. It all has the same information, but it's kind of like a pick your poison sort of thing. So parents can choose whatever works best for them, because there are so many different options right now. It's really hard to know what works best for your families until you try all of those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that, especially having the administrator approach, because I think one of the best things that I've seen from, especially the parent preferences, but it's been so interesting to hear our district administrators truly listen to teachers and to families. They always have, right?
Yeah.
But you'll talk to any principal and they'll be like, I just kind of want to sub just for one day so I can just get that, back in the classroom and just, just do it again, right? Because that's ultimately why they are in the role that they're in, is for kids. And
Yeah.
so it's just awesome when our district administrators are like, okay, what do we need? I want to listen and hear from not only the families, from the students, but most importantly from the teachers.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think what we're seeing, which is really exciting, at least what I see with our administrators in my district, is that they went from, prior to COVID, every week sending, a phone call home with a quick announcement. This is what the week looks like. Minimum day on Monday, parent conferences next week. Have a great week. They went from that to doing, everyone sends home now a virtual newsletter in addition to the phone call. So the newsletter will typically have links and pictures and messages and student quotes. And it kind of seems like they went on this journey from relaying that clear, concise, quick information to now they're telling a school story. Like I like to look back at some of the newsletters throughout the year and kind of see, oh, this is what they were doing in the fall, and this is the activity this school was working on, and things I wouldn't have seen certain teachers do that the principal was then able to highlight in their weekly virtual newsletter. That wasn't something that our district was doing prior to COVID. And so I think it's a great silver lining, and it also raises the point of making sure administrators know they do have a story to tell about their school. Every school community is so unique and beautiful and different. And being able to share that now virtually and document that is a brand new, wonderful, exciting thing. And so I really hope that other people are beginning to kind of take that up. Do you see that happening kind of where you're at?
Yes, I'm like beaming because I love that you just said like every school has a beautiful story to tell. And, ultimately, teaming up with you and with the Bloomz community through Bobby tonight, like, I'm so honored to be able to talk about this and so that are able to reflect on this topic. Want to share. And it's just been magical to watch this story sort of transpire. And as maybe, staffing changes have happened, or, students have been in and out of the classroom, for whatever reason, it's just been neat to just be present in every day, own that story. And then, when you go from August to May, tie it up with a bow and just be like, look what we did together.
Yes. Well, I know you're a parent. I'm a parent. My son's in preschool, but I look at him and I go, you spend as much time at school during the day as you do with me. I want to know what's going on there. I don't want to just have that phone call home of, okay, this conference is happening here, this game is happening here. I want to know what the activities are, what's going on in other classes that he may be in one day. Like I kind of want to follow along and I want to feel more part of their community, and technology is a way that we get to do that now, which is really exciting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of leads into the safety talk. And this is new and not anything I am an expert in by any stretch of the imagination, but I know it's a big conversation right now, is how do we find that balance between what's effective, but also what's safe for our kids? Because if you look up how to better communicate with families as a teacher online, there are so many resources, and it can be really difficult because when you see something and you read all the wonderful things about it and it seems beaming and wonderful and beautiful, but then you read all the specifics and it's free, it might sell student data. We know we can't use something like that. So kind of navigating all the resources and how do we find that balance? Do you guys have in your district, Amy, like any sort of policy on social media?
I love this conversation because this could honestly be like a topic for another webinar.
The entire conversation? Yeah.
Oh my heavens, yes, because I'm thinking about, so yes, to answer your question, we do, and it's largely in part because we are K-12, and so we do have students that are able to use social media in our junior high school. Ultimately, we have teachers, we have administrators, and we're finding that when people want to connect with us, maybe families, maybe extended families want to connect with what's going on in our school, they 9 times out of 10 go to the social media feeds over the website and so forth. So there is that in teaching not only our students, but also our staff members and each other about remaining safe online, specifically in a social media environment, but then also, professional behavior, whether you're of age to have a social media account, or if you have been a social media user, as a grown-up for a while. Something else that came up, that you had mentioned about selling data and so forth. I mean, all of a sudden we were like, oh my goodness, we are connecting children with usernames and passwords all over the place.
I know.
We're like, are we able to do this? Is this okay? And so we actually did a lot of conversations and a lot of talk with our technology department and, with the like student services area, because we just wanted to make sure we were not only in compliance, but that we ourselves were modeling decent digital citizenship, right?
Yes.
And then also with our parents' names and information. That was a big deal that we wanted to make sure that we were clear is that, if we put out something from school, it needs to be a safe space, and that your name and your email and your phone number, like it will not be taken advantage of. And that had to be like a quick conversation, but a very meaningful one as well.
Yes, this is one I find that as a district we're constantly reevaluating, and I feel like it's always under the microscope because we're always finding new programs and things to use. Like I know teachers that are constantly trying new things, and the message we always send out is double check that it has whatever program or platform you're going to be using has a contract, on the national database, which I've linked there, that says it's safe for kids. They're not selling student data because there's so many programs, you'll put in student names first and last. They'll ask for certain information, or they'll ask to sync with your Google Classroom, whatever it might be. So they have that data there. And a lot of people don't understand when you do that, or even when you have kids go there, they're signed in to their accounts, accessing those sites. Those sites collect data. They're collecting data at an early stage. And so my rule of thumb has always been, if it seems too good to be true, it might be. So it's worth it to do a little bit of investigating. And I linked that there, and it is the national database. So you can search it if you want to by your state, whatever state you find yourself in, or by platform. It's really helpful.
Thank you for linking that, because district-wide, we just did what is your digital ecosystem, or our digital ecosystem conversation. So what that means is, we had to define, like, if you are a South Henry teacher, then, if you were to come and work here, like, expect to be proficient in these areas. And ultimately sharing with our teachers, this is our math curriculum. It comes with an online platform, and then here are the select others that you're welcome to use as well. As we get going, we just felt like it was really important to not overwhelm our teachers, to not overwhelm our students, to not overwhelm our families with a giant password passport, if you will. Just to start small, and then as things change, like, let that grow and change, right? So that was another really good conversation, and it will always be a conversation that keeps revisiting itself, because I do believe that the digital ecosystem, is something that can be ever changing, right? But it also has to be engaging with all users. I mean, we got to buy into, if we're going to use this product, we're going to really use this product and believe in it, and set an example for our students, so that when they have that username and that password option to enter, then they show up as that digital citizen ready to learn.
Yeah, it's so important. Well, and I love that you mentioned kind of modeling as educators what that looks like for kids, because we just recently, much to the pain of my kindergarten teacher heart, we recently implemented changing student passwords every year. Every year, our kids will have a new password, because we want to sort of model that as a district of, hey, you want to make sure you're changing your passwords regularly to stay safe online. Even though they're going through our platforms, which we vetted and we believe are safe, we just want to begin to model that. When I was teaching kindergarten, we got our set of Chromebooks, and I was so excited. And then they gave me the username and passwords, and I looked at them and I thought, I don't understand how my 5-year-olds are going to be able to type 17 characters as their password, and everyone has a different one. I don't know how this is going to work. It would take at times like 10 minutes for them to even get signed in, but they could do it. They could totally do it. We've come a long way since then. That was the first year we had Chromebooks. But I thought when we talked about changing passwords every year, it hurt my teacher heart, because it takes them years to remember their password, and now we're going to change it. But ultimately, to model at that district and school level what is safe and appropriate and effective. When we do that for our kids, we're really training them to be like human beings in this current tech savvy society, and how to practice that. And with something as simple as changing your password every year is really valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else, Amy or Bobby, you want to add to specifically to safety? I know, I think we had a question in the chat.
You did. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
do you want
great.
to read that, or?
Yeah, let me read this. I was having a little bit of a connection issue, so I had to close my stuff off. But do you think email was the #1 parent preference in the nationwide survey because a unified district classroom communication solution is still an innovative and relatively unknown tool, especially within the parent audience? Being that since COVID has been really current, and we have changed our platforms, and we're really trying to build strategies around communicating and finding these resources that are safe, that help us with multi-varied ways to communicate with our families, which is really important. And you guys touched base on that. Is one thing doesn't work for every single parent. Some like email, some like voicemail, some like push notifications, some like various platforms that they can choose to access. And Michelle, you said that with your husband has various platforms he uses, and the parents can choose theirs. And Bloomz has that, especially, is those varied resources. But with the knowledge, I suppose, not really knowing and being able to survey within the last year of COVID, really determining what is the #1 preferred way. I don't know if we could really pinpoint that, since we have really evolved more than we used to have for communication.
I agree.
I love this question.
I know, it's so good. Well, and I think the thing I hear the most about specifically the Bloomz for parents is how easy it is. It's an app. You open it up, you get your alerts. Like, it's a really wonderful and simple tool for them to be able to communicate and keep up in real time with their family. So it may very well be, I wasn't a part of that survey, so I can't speak to why email would be the #1, but it makes perfect sense that it was something they knew and they were just grasping for what they could hold on to. It reminds me of like spelling homework, when I'd send home spelling homework, that was the one thing they would grasp onto, not the Common Core math, not the spelling homework, because it was what they knew. It was like, we're going to help this kid spell. They will be spelling. They will have to YouTube all the Common Core math, but spelling they've got. So I think it might be that. It was just what was familiar. That makes a lot of sense. Amy, what do you think about that?
That's a really good point, because we do gravitate towards what we know and what we're comfortable with. And we have been topsy-turvy the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, right? Are we going into 2 years? And we're all learning new things that I don't think that would have been surveyed. So that was a really good question, a really good point to make, that we just haven't really surveyed since we've really gotten productive with different strategies and different uses, because it ultimately took all of us a year just to get grounding in COVID, and grounding in how do we communicate, and grounding in what LMS do we use, and what social media do we use, and what SIS, student information system do we use. And it took a good year, and now we're in, like you said, Michelle, a stomping ground of really starting to understand and really evaluate more focused what we are doing to be really intent on communicating with families and allowing them to be part of the whole thing. Like, they get to choose, they get to have different modalities that will work for them. They get to be part of that whole system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think what I'm taking away from this whole conversation, because things are ever evolving and technology is constantly changing, I think the key thing to remember is whatever we as educators choose, whatever platform, however we decide to set up our year, I think the key is consistency. Being consistent, knowing what parents can rely on is really important, because we want to remove that frustration. Technology is wonderful. I'm the technology coach. I preach technology. I love technology. But what we don't want to do is be so engrossed in it that we create a frustrated environment by trying all sorts of different things in one year. Whatever we choose, I would recommend we just stick with, be consistent with, because I think that's where we're going to reach parents the most.
I agree. Absolutely. I love that question because, you know, we had mentioned email kind of being like a security blanket for the families, right? Not much changed with email, and it was to be practiced and loved on over the years. And then all of a sudden, it is fascinating to watch all of these companies, big companies, you know, Google and so forth, and how they have truly continued to transform themselves, right?
Yeah.
Throughout week to week. I mean, just staying on top of, you know, some updates from, we use Seesaw, and then of course, you know, in using Bloomz, it was so wonderful to be able to find a place where I could track behavior, I could communicate, I could post photos, students could communicate and share a part of their learning. And that was something that was like, whoa. And so while it's new and evolving and it's a great quick way of meeting parents where they're at, I think that email is that tried and true, consistent. And so while our families were like, oh, I'm getting lost in emails, they were still getting them. And, you know, so there was that as well.
Yeah,
the trail.
I have another good question.
Yeah.
This one says, any firsthand examples of positive change you've experienced since implementing this tool you're able to share? So both of you can share what kind of positive change you've seen since you've implemented. Well, let's say we'll talk about Bloomz.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'll go first because I can speak from having a mom of an elementary kiddos, 2 elementary kiddos. I'm also a teacher in the elementary, and then I also get to work with the teachers and training them on this platform. And so ultimately, hearing that our families were just, myself included, overwhelmed with the amount of apps. I had one folder on my phone that was dedicated to apps from school, and it was swipeable. And it was just like, oh my heavens. So while notifications were coming in and those little red bubbles were telling me when things were waiting for me, it was overwhelming. And so to be able to find a platform where I could direct parents of multiple children was a big win for our elementary. And it just happened to be in our elementary, most of our families have more than one child in attendance. And so that was a huge, huge win. And shortly behind that was watching our teachers' personalities come out on their feeds. It was so cool to see. Some of them were like, oh, I've already got a photo album posted of the first day of school. It's amazing. And some of them were like, I just updated my banner and I just said hi to families. And so it was just really lovely to be able to watch our teachers grow. Okay, so then from the parent side, I had a couple friends come in and they were just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I'm hearing from the main office. I'm hearing from my daughter's teacher. I'm hearing from my other daughter's teacher, and I'm hearing from my son's teacher. And it's just one app. So you're hearing the common thread of the one-stop shop coming out, which is a huge positive. But then also just the multifaceted approach that this one app lends itself. So I've mentioned you can track behavior, you can communicate through personal or direct messages that are protected by the teacher and the administrator, the parent and the student. And then also the student has a little voice because they've got the biggest voice, right? They're the ones doing a lot of the work, and they can show off that work and be like, hey mom, look at me, look what I did. And so it's just really lovely, especially when some of our parents and our students and our teachers are just feeling like, whew, I love when a child comes up to me and says, Mrs. Stevens, my mom just said, "Psst, love you, buddy." And I was like, oh, he's like, I just really needed to hear that today. And it's before lunch. I was like,
I love
cool.
that. Amy, it's so cool to listen to you because I know your teachers have been so brave to get the students involved into the communication platform with the ability to share with their parents. And so that's really fun to hear you talk about the students enjoying that connection with their parents, as well as you and the teachers are really building those relationships with parents too with this platform. It's so
Yes.
fun to hear that.
Yes, but go slow to go fast because
Yeah.
that has been huge. Just go slow to go fast. So with anything, we didn't even launch Bloomz for, at least a week into school because it was brand new and our families were new and we just wanted to do it well. And so we communicated with families. And then as soon as it unleashed, it was like, okay, now the next step, now the next step, now the next step. And it's just truly been a glorious hike.
Go slow to go fast. That's fantastic. I don't think I've heard that before, but it's perfect, especially for my job. We've been using Bloomz as a district for years now, and only because we had one teacher who discovered it on their own and then tried it, loved it so much, shared it with all of her partner teachers, and then everyone at her school was using it. Then she did free voluntary trainings for teachers in our district to use because that was when we have the premium version now, but they were using the free version. And then we ended up doing trainings on it. Teachers loved it. And we had one teacher in particular use it specifically for parent teacher conference sign up. And every year she would typically average usually about 30 to 40% parent participation in parent teacher conferences. Is a really low turnout. She used Bloomz, and I think she said she had almost 80% of her parents sign up simply with Bloomz. Like, it was fantastic. And we've just come out of parent teacher conference time as a district. And I'd say that's like one of the number one things I hear from our teachers is the amount of parent involvement that increases because they're able to connect with them very quickly is wonderful. I've also heard that they love the behavior management piece, and parents like that too, because they can see, oh, my kid just got a point, they've met their goal. It's so exciting. So I love that feature of it because they're able to kind of take the parent, while we can't have parents right now in the classroom, they're able to feel in a sense that they're there with that communication piece, with the streaming, the announcements, with the pictures, with those little behavior management piece, if that's what they're using. And so that's really, I think that's just one more piece of bringing the parent in to that connection and partnering with them and educating and supporting their kids.
Yeah, I would agree. I would like to ask both of you ladies to think and we've talked about this, a statement to this question is, what is communication in education today?
Love that.
I know. I know we've spent this entire presentation kind of going through that and asking that question, but really I just keep coming back to partnering with families. And I know that's going to look so different, and every district's going to have a different need. Every community is going to look different. But ultimately, where we're at right now is we're in a place where we absolutely have to partner with families to better support their kids. There have been a lot of surprisingly wonderful things that have come out of a really hard time, but there are also a lot of setbacks. And so I think communication in education today looks like a phone call. It looks like a message on Bloomz. It looks like an email. It looks like a quick, hey, can I chat with you about this? It's that partnership. It's that constant need to make that connection because we really need to work as a team to be successful.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm going to piggyback on the word connection. That was my very first word that came to mind, because while we've always used technology to connect, whether it's via a text or a phone call, one of the things that I don't know that I would have ever asked a parent to do is a video chat, right? Because that was almost like very intrusive into somebody's space. And now video chat is just, it is what we do and it's how we do it. And, we're talking to our students about, the virtual experience fatigue and how to power yourself up as your device is powering itself up and so forth. And so making connections is huge. And technology has been able to aid in that. I made this statement in the beginning of our talk that teachers especially were very concerned about this device or about technology taking over their role, taking over their job. And here it's been like a crutch where it's been able to be used to support this amazing human that is in charge. And it's also kept that firm, that firm ground underneath, right? To hold everyone up. And so connections are still being made. And we've figured out a way to communicate while making connections. And if we find that maybe the email was read incorrectly, or the voicemail wasn't taken, in the way that it needed to be, there's always the ability, there's one more way to connect because of the technology in education today. And so making connections and using that to enhance communication, I really feel that our families will feel engaged in what we're doing with their tiny humans. Even if they're 18, they're still their tiny humans, all day when they're in our care.
Yes. Yes. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, that connection and continuing the positive relationships and that engagement. I mean, that it's that back and forth. It's not one way anymore. It is that engagement and that connection and that reciprocal communication that's really proving to build that relationship, that positive culture, to invite the parents in when they haven't even gotten to go into the school since COVID started, right? And we're making sure that they get invited in, they're part of the community. And that's huge, right? Connection and community, I think, are like the biggest words. And when we talk about the communication that we need to deliver to our families and our community outside of the school, because they're part of this. It's not isolated anymore. Teachers aren't isolated anymore. Well, I have had a really good time, and I appreciate both Michelle and Amy for being here today and their conversation from their point of view. And they're in the trenches today, and they're experiencing what they have to deal with figuring out how to implement and integrate and train teachers and train parents on communication strategies and incorporating it into their district and schools. And they're doing that right now and learning as they go, and we change as we go because we adapt. Educators are complete adapters. And so we just keep on learning and keep on getting better each time that we utilize Bloomz, that we utilize the communication within Bloomz. And I'm really happy that I got the chance to have you here and that you were able to talk to other colleagues and other educators about your experience, because we do need to talk about this experience and how communication has changed the landscape of education. And I just wanted to leave you with the next two webinars that are coming up. Monday, December 6th with Dr. Daisy Morales and Collins Brooks. And then Monday, December 13th with our CEO, Chax. And we have Ryan Miller, who's a principal also at Enterprise Elementary School District in California. So I'm super excited to continue these discussions, which are really important for us to have as we're navigating this whole change with what we've experienced with COVID. And honestly, I think it's a change for the better. Don't you guys agree?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I do. We are teaching ourselves by modeling for our kids that we can solve problems, right? And we can learn from failures and we can put one foot in front of the other. And so just so thankful for being able to team up with everyone. So appreciate this time tonight. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Have a great
Thank
evening,
you.
and thank you for being here with us as well.